told me the dead mountains are quiet, that the snow muffles everything until even a scream sounds respectful. That's a lie. The mountains don't go quiet. They just decide when they want to listen and when they want to sing back. That night, the song had our names in it. It called for me and for my dog and for the man who used to be my brother. I wasn't supposed to be in Karsk Oblast. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere with frostbitten trees and a sky that looks like a bruise that won't heal, but grief does what winter does, it spreads. 6 months after Mara died, my house shrank until a single room was too big, and my bed felt like a cliff edge. The only thing that got me out of the door was Hound, my German shepherd, who still woke me before dawn, insisting on patrols we didn't have to take anymore. He was born for work, bred to find what hides and protect what breathes. He didn't know how to retire from that. Neither did I when my older brother Theo invited me on a winter trek to the Singing Hollow. I laughed for the first time since the funeral. He sold it the way only Theo can, charismatic, reckless, stubbornly hopeful. 2 nights under a sky that hasn't looked at a city in 100 years, he said, fingertips drumming the table like they could tap out a rhythm his nerves could match. Locals won't do overnights. Too many stories. That's what makes it good. We met our guide, Katia, in a village that looked as though it gave up on clocks and healed itself with smoke. The people had a way of watching us without letting us see their faces all at once, like they were each a piece of a single turning head. Katia shook my hand with a grip like rope, and frostbite scars up her knuckles. She stood near Hound and waited, as if to be assessed. Hound sniffed, huffed, then leaned lightly against her thigh, the equivalent of a nod. She smiled without showing teeth. He listens to wind, she said. Good. We spent the day checking gear. Hound sled, thermal layers, 2 tents and a third just for emergency shelter. Satellite phone, compass, spare compass, 3 radios. Theo kept up a steady chatter. Stories about Mara that didn't break on the rocks. About how she once made him eat moss in the woods because he swore it was edible. He didn't bring up the accident, or the river, or the quiet after. He didn't mention the baby name we'd chosen and never used. Katia warned us the same way every guide does, in that sing-song rhythm danger adopts when it's used to being ignored. If wind sings, don't sing back. If you hear bells, don't count them. If you smell smoke, look for footprints. The hollow keeps a mouth, like a cave, Theo asked, grinning. She looked at the ridge beyond the tree line. Like a choice, the climb in was spiteful. The snow was old, several thaws, and freezes into a crust that cracked and then held you, as if reconsidering. We passed tree trunks clawed by something higher than any bear should reach. Katia tapped them once with the side of her glove. Ice storm got cruel one winter, she said. Bark remembers the wrong way. When we broke into the hollow at dusk, everything went flat and huge. The sky was a slate opera, the kind that only finds its voices when the audience is very, very afraid. Hound trotted ahead to nose the clearing where we'd set camp, then stopped dead and looked back at me. Not warning yet, not approval. The middle thing ready. We raised the tents as the cold turned sharp. Theo dropped a pot on the stove and made stew that tasted like the memory of warmth rather than heat itself. He told a story about the time I tried to teach Hound to ignore a cat, and he decided instead to befriend it so aggressively the cat moved into our porch. The laugh that came out of me sounded like metal. Hound put his head in my lap, the weight of his skull saying, "Here, here, stay here." The first odd thing was small, like a test. Our compasses drifted. North went south, then east, then followed Hound when he circled the tents. Katia held hers up and frowned. "Not the mountain," she murmured. "Something under. The hollow has magnets," Theo joked. Katia shook her head and took her radio from her chest pocket, thumb hovering. She listened. Only static. She turned the dial. Static in another key. "If wind sings," she said quietly, almost to herself, "we don't sing back. We ate quickly." Theo courted courage with sarcasm until his eyelids drooped. Katia laid out watch shifts. I took first. Hound wouldn't sleep. He moved in slow, deliberate circuits around our camp, the way he used to sweep buildings, checking corners and windows, as if snow could grow eyes. He stopped by the ash pit we dug for coals, nose hovering over its black mouth, then stiffened. His hackles lifted like a field of wheat catching wind. I heard it a moment later, not a song, not exactly, a tone that felt like it had been tuned to the shape of my bones. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the mountain's throat to the hollows in my ribs. Katia's radio hummed without being touched, and Theo whispered in his sleep voice, "Mara." Hound pressed his side to my knee, shaking. It wasn't fear, not the way it shows up in people. It was fury with nowhere to go. "It's nothing," I lied, which is what people say when they want a second more to listen to the wrong thing. The note shifted. It threaded itself, becoming something like a flute, if a flute was made from someone's breath while they drowned. In the tree line, sickle red lights rose and held, as if hung on invisible lines. One by one, hovering, waiting, Theo sat up inside his tent and spoke through the canvas. "Mara, don't go too far," he said thickly, like he was a boy again and we were playing near the river. And if he said it loud enough, she might come back to shore. Katia emerged with her knife and a look that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with memory. "Get inside," she ordered. "Don't answer if it calls your name." "Hound," I said, but he wouldn't move. He stared at the ash pit. The ashes trembled. Not stirred by wind pulsed, as if something beneath inhaled and exhaled through the burnt mouth. The red lights drifted, forming an arc over us. The note climbed, a hook in a throat. Theo laughed once, the kind of laugh that comes right before crying. "She's singing," he said. "She's singing for us." The ground went soft under our feet, not melting, slick, as if something licked the underice with a hot tongue. Hound bit my sleeve and tugged, with insistence he'd only ever used at the edge of roofs and the mouths of alleys that smelled like blood. I stumbled toward the tent. The radio in my pocket crackled, and then, with the intimacy of breath in ear, a voice that was and wasn't Mara's said, "Eli." I dropped the radio into the snow. The red lights blinked off. The tone cut clean. The compasses spun and then stopped. We were alone again in a field that pretended nothing had happened. Hound stood over the radio and growled deep enough the snow around his paws shivered. Katia's breath made smoke ribbons in the flashlight beam. "We stay awake," she said simply. "And we don't say yes, but grief is a yes said in the body. A yes that keeps saying itself, even when the mouth refuses." I lay in the tent, Hound pressed into my side, listening to the mountain practice our names in silence. And I thought, if the hollow has a mouth, does it have a hunger? And how long has it been starving? Outside, the ashes in the pit made a shape I couldn't see, but I could feel it. A pattern that wanted to be read by fingertips and mistakes. A map that only drew itself for the lost. By morning, the wind had gone thin as glass, and the sky was the color of a bruise stretched to breaking. The compasses aligned like nothing had been wrong. Hound slept finally, head on my boot, a wet patch where drool had frozen to the leather. Theo emerged from his tent with snow in his hair and an apology in his mouth he didn't know where to put. Katia stared at the ash pit as if it might confess. The shape was gone, or rather, it had never been there. We all agreed on that, out loud, like a charm against having seen the same thing. I reheated the stew and tried to taste anything. Theo made jokes limp as thawed rope. "So, good sign," he said, waving his compass. North decided to be north again. "I've missed that guy." Katia's hand was steady as she poured tea. She didn't drink it. "The hollow sings when it wants company," she said. "We won't be company. We passed through. We packed light for a day hike deeper into the basin. No overconfidence. No bait." Hound ranged close, making slow figure eights, like someone stitching a wound shut. Trees stood with their backs to us, branches all leaning inward toward a point I couldn't see. We stepped into a corridor the forest made, and for a time, the world pressed into a single direction. The first bells came faint, a tinkle that made me think of our hallway wind chimes back home, the ones Mara hung for luck, that drove me mad when drafts turned the house into a whisper factory. These weren't sweet. They were out of tune by exactly the amount that makes human teeth ache. Theo stopped dead and pointed. "You hear that?" "No," I said too quickly. Katia didn't look at me. "Don't count," she reminded, voice low. "If you count, you give it measure. If you give it measure, it can step to you." We walked. The bells followed without coming closer. The snow had a crush to it like rice under a heavy hand. Hound halted at a place where the trees opened, and I nearly went to my knees without understanding why. The ground dropped abruptly into a bowl, not the hollow we'd camped in. A smaller mouth hidden like a trap. The surface ice was milk white and thin, the way eyeballs go cloudy in stories you tell to scare children. There were shapes beneath the ice, dark and formal like chairs left for guests who never arrived. The village called this the listening table, Katia said. A priest came once to bless the forest. He said the saints refused to kneel here. My brother is a good man. And sometimes good men do reckless things to prove life is still bigger than death. Theo stepped to the lip and extended a boot, testing the edge. The ice moaned, long and patient, like a house remembering weight. Hound planted himself against Theo's shin and shoved, a low bark cutting out of him like a command he'd been given once and never forgot. Theo stumbled back, arms windmilling. He laughed, bright and dangerous. Okay, message received. We circled the bowl and found tracks. Big, outspread prints with long gaps between, as if someone with very long legs had paced for hours in a single rutted loop. Alongside them, smaller, bare footprints. The small ones crisscrossed, double-backed, merged. When Theo crouched to examine them, his breath hitched. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The small prints were the right size for a child old enough to walk and young enough to be carried when tired. A memory struck me so hard my ribs went tight. The almost name, the almost cry, the almost life that had been a room in our house, painted yellow. I breathed through my nose until the sting behind my eyes cooled. Hound bumped my hand with his head, and I found the collar at his throat, like a rope thrown from a boat I hadn't realized had slipped anchor. The bells grew louder, then soft, approaching, then receding without moving. Katia's eyes were on the tree line. We're leaving the table, she said. Now, we returned to camp earlier than planned. The sky lowered itself until it sat on our shoulders. As we crossed the clearing, Hound froze and lifted his lip. Our tents were undisturbed. The sled exactly where we left it, but the stove had been moved 1 foot to the left, and the pot lid was tilted, resting against the handle, like someone had gone to pick it up and changed their mind halfway. Katia swore softly, in a prayer rhythm that made sense even if you didn't know the words. Pack everything, she said. We'll camp on the ridge tonight. There's wind there, too rude to listen. That was when the radios woke, one after another, without anyone touching them, not static this time. Humming. A child's voice, a woman's voice, a man's voice. They threaded and unthreaded, like someone trying on a series of masks and not quite finding one that fit. Theo stood as if a string had pulled him upright. His face broke into a smile my body didn't recognize on him anymore. The smile of before. Hear that, he whispered, leaning toward his radio with his whole self. She's laughing. It isn't her, I said. It was the first time I ever put those words into air. They were heavy and they hurt. It isn't. It's not her, Katia agreed. But it knows how to describe her. The radios switched to urgency, breathing fast. Footsteps in snow. The soft grunt of someone lifting. The sound of a small cough. Theo, the woman's voice said, precise as a scalpel. "Theo, bring the blanket," Hound erupted, a furious bray that surprised even him. He lunged and knocked Theo's radio into the snow, then stood over it with his muzzle pressed to the speaker, teeth bared. The voice on the other end shifted to a soothe. "Good dog," it cooed. "Good boy. Come here." Hound closed his mouth and began to tremble. Not fear. Rage choked by obedience. The obedience made me ache. "He's not your good boy," I said, and the rage crested in me, white and bright. "He is mine." The radios went dead. The stove clicked twice like a tongue against teeth. The ash pit was flat. No pattern to destroy, no map to refuse. Theo looked at me like I'd done something sacrilegious. "What if it's her?" he said softly. "What if the hollow keeps what we love, and all it wants is a way to give it back?" "Things that ask for names," Katia said, "not unkind, often intend to keep them." We argued the way families argue, when fear wears a face we love. Theo insisting we couldn't treat kindness like a knife. Me insisting on knives. Katia making both arguments simpler and more brutal by cutting them down. We go. We don't sing. We don't count. We don't say yes. We left camp for the ridge with a haste that felt like we were sneaking past a sleeping thing. The slope up was cruel. The wind met us like a slap, then a kiss, loud enough to drown voices that weren't made of weather. We made a half circle of rocks and anchored the tents with ropes that looked like veins against the white. Hound lay in the entrance of my tent, on duty, because he didn't know how not to be. We took shifts. Theo insisted on first. "If she calls," he said, "I should be the one to not answer." He lasted an hour before the bells began again, far at first, then close enough the ropes hummed in sympathy. I sat up, heart a bird. Hound didn't move. He stared at the tent wall with a focus that made me want to apologize for being human. Theo hummed back without meaning to, a tiny noise, like when you find the right memory in the dark and try to keep it by shaping your mouth around it. "Please," he whispered. "Just one word, just one." The wind snapped the tent hard enough the poles groaned. Hound whined once and then went still. I reached for Theo through the canvas. "We don't bargain with things that make the weather mimic grief," I said, trying to make it a joke and failing. I waited for him to laugh. He didn't. The bells stopped. In their place, a single flute note, so low it made my teeth itch. In the other tent, Katia sat up. "Don't sing back," she said again, as if each time she spoke it, she was saying it for a different person, and hoping one of us would be saved by hearing it. Theo's breath evened. Sleep pulled him under. Outside, something walked the perimeter of our camp. We heard it drag a foot, pause, drag again. It didn't try to be quiet. That made it worse. It wanted us to know it had legs and distance and intention. Hound didn't growl. He held his breath and listened. And I tried to match him, because there's trust, and then there's this. Letting a dog teach you how to be predator enough to survive your own species of sorrow. Around midnight, the thing stopped. The wind chose then to cut entirely. silence after was not quiet. It was listening. This, I learned, was the most dangerous sound of all. By dawn, the air had a weight. It felt like wearing someone else's coat that never warms. Theo looked like he'd gone 4 days without REM, though we had shared our hours. Katia's cheeks were tender red, not from the cold, but from biting them while she kept her own counsel. Hound limped slightly, a soreness in the right hind that hadn't been there before. He refused any fuss, defiant as a soldier. We planned to pack and leave the hollow entirely, retreat to the village, where the smoke cured the air, and the people didn't say what they were thinking, but somehow made you feel less alone anyway. Katia said we could make it by late afternoon if the snow stayed in this mood. It didn't. As we broke camp, the ridge wind abruptly stalled, and the world went oddly echoeful. Our voices came back to us, a half-second late and slightly wrong, the way recordings pick up a thickness on old machines. We go now, Katia said. No stops. No counting bells, Theo finished. He tried a smile that had too many teeth. No singing back. We made it half the distance to last night's camp, when Hound froze and pulled, not forward but back, tail stiff, ears arrowed at the clearing below. He had that pre-bark breath locked in his chest. That means the world is about to do something irreversible. What? Theo asked, too loud. The echo took his voice and turned it thin. Hound answered in the oldest way he knew, by moving. He broke down the slope in a controlled slide that made my heart trip, and I had no choice but to follow. The tether between my body and his, just as real as the lead in my hand, even when it wasn't there. The clearing looked normal from the edge. Our old footprints, the stove where we'd left it. Then I saw the ash pit. It had made itself again, without our fire touching it. The ashes lay on top of new snow, against all reason, against all wind. They'd shaped themselves into a pattern, so intricate my eyes couldn't decide whether to read or recoil. Circles nested in lines that cut in angles the mind wants to call sacred, because it hasn't invented a better word for alarm. At each intersection, a small mound sat like a knuckle beneath the skin. Katia sucked a breath between her teeth. Don't step on it, she said uselessly, because the first urge when something draws a map of you is to smear it. Theo crouched. What is it? An invitation, Katia said. A story the hollow thinks we'll want to finish. My ears filled with a pressure like I was on a plane that refused to land. Hound circled the pattern, careful, precise, never putting a paw on the lines. He kept his head low and his mouth closed, nostrils working with quick little huffs. He looked up at me once, and I felt a word in my chest, even though Hound doesn't speak human. No, we go around, Katia said, and we did, wide. But the hollow's appetite for our attention had been whetted. As we moved, the radios hiccuped to life in our packs. Not voices at first, scrapes, like someone writing letters on the inside of the world with a blade. Then words, fragments, blanket, hush now, hungry, "It's cold, Theo, Eli, dog." Theo's head snapped back each time his name came, as if it had been tossed and he had to catch it. I kept my eyes on the trees, as if in response they obliged me. A dozen red points glowed to our left, then our right, above, low. Not stars, not drones, the same hung lamps that had hovered the first night, except nearer now, mischievous and unpretending. "Don't look," Katia said, and that is the most impossible order in the human repertoire. We looked. Of course we did. The lights swam in patterns that made the back of my throat taste salt. They darted and hung and drew curves that closed around us and then unclosed, like a heart seizing and deciding against it. The radios matched the movement with their own sound, the flute, lazy and sinister now, and under it, a beat that was almost a heartbeat, and almost marching feet, and almost the thud of soil put back where it came from. We made the edge of the clearing, and the snow under my boots gave like a thing learning to swallow. I lunged for a tree trunk and missed. Theo grabbed my pack and yanked, swearing. Hound braced. Claws scored lines in the crust. For a second that lasted the length of the life I didn't get to have with my wife. I began to slide. Then the snow decided against me, and I stood again, breath hurtling out. "Down," Katia commanded suddenly, not to us, to Hound. The dog dropped without hesitation. I followed the line of Katia's eyes and saw footprints overlaying our own, one by one, like a second version had walked our path. A few inches to the left, just enough to test whether we were paying attention. The small, bare ones too. Always the small ones. Theo's hand fell from my shoulder. He stared into the trees with an expression that could have been worship or surrender. "Do you hear it?" He asked no one. "It's her. It has to be. No one else knows that stupid song she made up about the cat and the fern." "Don't tell it," Katia snapped, sharper than she'd been yet. "Don't give it facts to sew you with." I stepped close. "Theo, look at me." His eyes found mine, and I saw the boy who'd locked his door and pushed the dresser against it the night our parents screamed at each other, and I slept in the hall to be close. I saw the man who made soup when I wouldn't eat and burned it and made it again. He opened his mouth. "If there's a way to get her voice one more time," he said, "and I don't take it, who am I? I could have said the truth. A man, a widower, a brother, someone who survives." I said nothing, because honesty here felt like fire on oil. Hound rose without my telling and inserted his body between Theo and the trees. A warm, determined wall. "We're leaving," I said, and I let my voice be a rope and not a question. We turned. The radios stayed blessedly dead for 3 minutes that felt like reprieve. Then they all spoke at once. 3 channels, 3 versions of a life. One was the river, fast and stupid. One was the hospital, beeping with indignity. One was a nursery painted yellow. "Theo," said the yellow room, "could you hold this?" He moved, not a run, a shift, the kind someone does in a pew when they get called to the front, and they're not sure if they've been blessed or condemned. Hound blocked him. Theo sidestepped, patient. "Just a second," he said to me over his shoulder. "Stay here." "No," I said, and reached for his arm. He shook me without force. It felt like a rejection of an entire category of help. He took 2 steps toward the trees, and the red lights rose like applause. The ash pattern we had avoided trembled. One of the little mounds at the intersections cracked like a knuckle. Something soft and pale pushed through the tip of a finger from beneath, perhaps, or a root ending in an eye. Hound leapt and landed inside the circle without touching the lines, teeth snapping on nothing visible. He growled a sound I will hear in my sleep forever. The flutes keened. Theo stopped, hands half raised. The radios changed unison, a new voice taking over. It wasn't Mara. It was me. My voice from last year saying, "Please don't go down there. It isn't shallow." Then Mara's laugh on top of it, and the cough and silence. Katia threw her knife, not at my brother, but at the ash pattern. It landed blade down in the exact center. The ash hissed like salted slugs. The mounds flattened. The radios screamed. The red lights blinked out as if a distant hand pinched their wicks. The trees lifted their branches a fraction, like shrugging. Theo stumbled backward and fell. I was on him before he got up, hands on his coat, my face too close. We stared at each other like we didn't know who we were anymore. "You don't get to decide for me," he said, almost gentle, which hurts more than anger. "You don't get to take away every maybe. Maybe is what kills here," Katia said, retrieving her knife. The ash around it was glassed, a black shine that made a mirror of the sky. "We leave. We should have left yesterday." We started again, slower, like we were moving through a throat. Hound took point, then fell back, then took point again, the way you do when you don't trust the air enough to let it walk behind you. The hollow didn't sing. That was almost worse. We reached a stand of birches that, from a distance, looked like a cemetery of pale women. As we passed among them, carvings appeared at eye height tiny, neat many. Names in Cyrillic, dates, simple lines for faces, all with mouths open, as if caught at the end of a note. I didn't ask. Katia didn't volunteer. The wind sighed as if it had tried holding its breath and regretted it. We made it to the ridge trail. We made it to the old rope bridge and decided to camp on our side and not risk it in pitch light. We anchored the tents with a desperation that disguised itself as efficiency. Hound lay with his spine against mine through the canvas. A second spine for a second person, until my body found the old rhythm of sleeping next to a living thing that would wake if I stopped waking. I dreamed of ash painting our nursery floor in careful lines. When I tried to sweep it up, it moved away from the broom and lay back down where it wanted to be. Night chose a different voice. No flutes, no bells, just the sound of rope moving against wood, softly and steadily, like a swing in a backyard nobody has lived in for a long time. The rope bridge across the gulch groaned in time. even though the wind turned and turned again, impatient and noncommittal. "I'll go check," Theo said before either of us could stop him. He spoke calmly, not the bolting run from earlier, not the pew shuffle surrender. Calm was worse. Calm can walk you into a fire because the flames seem organized enough to respect. Katia moved with him. "Together," she said. Hound stood and then sat again, snarling low at the ground, as if the earth had said something impolite. I held his collar because I needed to hold something, not because he needed restraint. The bridge was the kind of old that is a skill rather than a flaw. Thick ropes, sturdy planks, carefully spaced slats, a handrail that had saved more than a few prideful men from the drop. In the dark, it looked like a stitch across a wound the mountain hadn't decided to close. Halfway across, Theo stopped. He turned his head like he'd heard a joke and was trying to decide whether to laugh. "Do you see them?" he asked. "See who?" Katia's knife was back in her hand, as if it had never left it. "The lanterns," he said, pleased and bewildered. Like church at Christmas when we were kids, and the old ladies were all eyes and teeth and scarves, and everything smelled like wax and oranges. He took one more step onto a plank that didn't belong. I didn't move. Something about the rhythm of the rope on wood had shifted. Each creak matched a footstep that wasn't ours. Each groan matched a weight that hadn't been there a breath ago. "Theo," I said, trying to fit all of winter and all of childhood and all of our kindness into 2 syllables. "Come back," he smiled, my brother, who cried with me until I stopped being afraid of doing it in front of another human, who held my dog the first day he came home like he was holding a secret he decided to keep. "I just want to see." He leaned not far, but enough. The plank under his foot sank not through age, but through preference. The rope above it lifted like a hand withdrawing from a handshake. Hound launched before Theo fell. There wasn't space to catch him. No time to form a plan that didn't end in a rope burning your palms, and an impossible choice about which direction to pull. Hound hit my brother's chest with enough force to push him backward. Theo struck a plank that behaved correctly, arms pinwheeling. He landed on one knee, breath knocked out, gasped, laughed. "Okay, okay, okay." Message received. Sit, heel. Good, Hound. He was talking to the dog and the mountain both. Hound trotted back, limping again in obvious pain, and leaned against me as if to say, "I have done the thing, now hold me." I did. I would have carried him through fire. Katia backed Theo off the bridge step by step, blade up, facing into the gulch, as if the drop itself had a face she refused to let out of sight. The rope creaked in disappointment, a sound easier to bear than joy. We stood again on our side, and no one pretended not to be shaking. Theo sat with his back against a tree and put his hands over his eyes. "How do we leave if the way out wants to be a mouth too?" he asked, voice small. "We find another way," Katia said. "Or we make the bridge tell us what it wants, instead of asking permission." "Bridges don't have wants," Theo said. Katia tilted her head, Everything has wants. The trick is telling which wants will digest you. We slept in infuriating increments, waking to the rope's slow speech and the low scratching of something tracing lines in the snow near our tents. In the gray, we found the new pattern. Not ash this time, but a shallow carve. Lines with the clean edges that only come from something with a point and patience. It mapped the exact shape of our camp. 3 tents, 1 sled, 3 human figures, 1 dog. The figures were drawn as stick men, but the heads had been carefully, lovingly made into circles that seemed to look back. Katia put her boot through the figure that was me. She did it like a blessing and a ward. The pattern bled cold air. The radios woke. "Ow," said a child's voice, offended. "Ow." I crushed the circle that was the dog. Hound flinched and then pressed into me. The radios laughed, soft, gentle, the way you laugh when something's tender and you want to make it braver. "Good boy," the woman's voice said again, and I wanted to tear the radios out by their wires and feed them to the mountain. We spent the day searching for another crossing. The gulch went on and on, a seam in the world that refused to be hemmed. We found an ice shelf that might bear us if we trusted it, and a new wind that tasted like old smoke. Every now and then, a red light blinked above the trees, and every time it did, we saw, between birches, a figure that was almost a person and almost a fog. The figures didn't approach. They moved the way you move when you want to be caught, but need the other person to do the catching so you can say you resisted. We took turns building barriers that felt symbolic more than practical. Ropes between trunks, talismans of metal from our pockets. The scarf Mara used to wrap our thermos the winter before she died tied around a pine branch, high enough the wind had to take it seriously. Theo touched the scarf once, fingers gentle, and said, "She would have hated this place." "Then let's go," I said. We worked the ice shelf with our bodies low, spreading weight, listening to the sounds we made, and the ones that answered. Hound hated it, but he trusted me enough to hate it only in my direction. We were halfway across when something gave under the surface, a bubble in the frozen river, an old log shifting, or a hand. The shelf wobbled. Katia hissed. Theo fell to his knees and let his weight ride the slide until it steadied. Hound scrabbled, claws screeching. The radio at my belt crackled. "Time," said a voice that wasn't a voice. "Time to come down." We made it across by inches and breath and defiance. On the far bank, my legs shook so hard I could feel the tremor in my teeth. Katia whooped once, not from triumph, but from the stubborn joy of making the world do what it didn't want to. Theo laughed, softer, his eyes wet. He put his forehead against mine, like he used to when we were boys, and pretended to be stronger than we were so the other could borrow it. Hound sat and licked his paw, and then, carefully, tucked it under, denying it. I checked the pads and found a cut deep enough to need stitches, and a piece of clear, sharp something lodged inside. Glass, ice, the mountain's tooth. I removed it as gently as I could. didn't cry. He looked at me like, "Do it. I can take it." We moved away from the gulch into thicker trees. The flutes came again in late afternoon, and the bells, but fainter, as if the hollow itself was annoyed. We declined a particular invitation, and was now throwing a smaller party in the next valley. The villagers' smoke curled in the distance, like a promise of other people's breakfasts. My chest hurt with sudden, stupid hope. That was when Theo said, conversationally, as if mentioning we needed more coffee, "We should go back tonight." Katia didn't turn. "No, to camp," he clarified, "just to get the compass." He patted his pocket and frowned. I lost it. I reached for my own. The needle shook like an animal trying to make itself look bigger. "Leave it," I said. "I can't." He stopped. He had that far-off look again. "She gave it to me," he said, "and that was unfair, because of course Mara gave us everything, and none of it was here. And if an object could load itself with enough meaning to sink us, a compass would be high on the list." "We keep moving," Katia said, and she put something into her voice that was the same thing Hound put in his growl. "No more maybes." Theo fell back a step, then another. Then he looked at me with guilt already on his face and bolted. It wasn't dramatic, just a pivot and a speed I'd forgotten he had when running meant joy instead of escape. He moved like he was following a tether that had always been there, a line the world had drawn and dared him to find. Hound launched and then staggered, pain catching his courage. He howled one raw, furious note. It shattered something in me. "Stay," I told him, and ran. Katia ran too, without swearing, which told me she was more afraid than she let on. The trees blurred. The world narrowed to the sound of my brother's boots over ice, and the distant, delighted jingle of bells that knew they'd been counted, even when we refused numbers. We didn't catch Theo in the trees. We caught him at the edge of the old clearing, breathless, cheeks raw, hair full of frost. He stood at the ash pit like a parishioner at the foot of a familiar altar, and I hated that the analogy fit. The compass lay in the center, not spinning, pointing. The ash pattern returned, simpler this time, as if whoever drew it had gotten impatient. Lines from the compass to 4 outer circles. In each circle, a small mound. "Don't," I said. He didn't move. "What if all it wants is an exchange?" he asked softly, as if bargaining could be made reasonable if you changed the verb enough times. What if we give it the right word, and it gives us one back?" "Mara isn't a word," I said. "She isn't a voice in a box. She isn't." He closed his eyes. "I know." He opened them again and looked at me, not the hollow. "I know. But if I turn around now, I'm afraid I'll become the kind of man who lives on the other side of wanting forever." And something moved under the ash. The first mound rose, cracked, and a small, pale thing poked through, the size of a bean. It looked for a moment like a tooth sprouting from earth. It was a fingernail. It flexed once, twice. Hound, behind me, screamed. I have never heard a dog make that noise. It stripped me down to nerves. He tried to run, and his leg betrayed him, and he dragged himself forward anyway, gangly and ugly and perfect. Katia swore with a holiness that would have made a priest blush. She pulled something from her pack, not a knife, a small tin. Inside, a powder the color of old bones. She flung it across the ash. The powder took light weirdly, as if the sun hit it at a different angle than the rest of the world. The fingernail went still. What? I began. Grave dirt, she said, no apology in her voice. From a grave that ended right, everything here is a conversation. You say, we know endings too. Theo stared at the tin like it was a moral test. You carry that. I carry what works. She nodded at the compass in the center. Pick it up, she told me. Quick, before it decides it's the center of the hollow and convinces the mountain. I stepped in with a precision I didn't know my body had and took the compass. It was cold enough to burn. The needle settled lazily, pointing not north, but toward the listening table. I wanted to throw it. I slipped it into my pocket. The ash hissed and then sighed, and the mounds relaxed, disappointed. The radios woke and said our names without voices, just the shape of the sound made by lips that weren't there. We turned our backs on it together, 3 people and a dog refusing choreography. We made it 5 steps before the flutes began from just inside the tree line. All the notes wrong by exactly enough to make human brains misfire. A figure moved between trunks, too thin to be a man, too long to be anything that grew here. It wore clothing I recognized in pieces. A coat like a Soviet photograph. A scarf like Katia's grandmother might have knitted. Boots that belonged to no year at all. Its face was a blur you could see only if you weren't looking at it. Theo reached for me and squeezed hard enough to leave half moons. Don't let me, he said. Okay, I said, and I meant it. I put my hand on his sleeve, and Hound leaned his shoulder into Theo's shins. We moved like a unit. The hollow tried embarrassment next. From the radios, the sound of a man sobbing and saying, "Please, I was wrong," and the sound of a child asking, "Can we go home now?" And a woman laughing like water over stone. Katia spoke over it, steady, dulling the edges of everything with human words. Left foot, right foot, breathe in, breathe out. Hound, good, Theo, here. Eli, here. The trees thinned. For a sick, bright second, I thought we had made it to the village edge. Instead, we stepped into a second clearing. This one new to us. It didn't feel like a mouth. It felt like a theater. In the center stood a table made of ice, deliberate, shaped. A slab on legs, polished enough to see your breath on its surface. Arranged on the table were objects that didn't belong to any of us and all of us. A child's mitten, a playing card, a rusted key, a Polaroid of strangers smiling against a brick wall, a lock of hair tied with red string, a cracked pair of glasses, a single boot. Katia inhaled as if to whistle, then didn't. "This isn't for us," she said. "We should not be here." Theo stepped forward. He was crying in that frustrated way grief makes men cry. like their faces are leaking. And they want very much to put the lid back on. He reached for the Polaroid. We can't leave them, he said. Leave them, Katia said, and the severity in her tone was a mercy. If you take, you make yourself part of the inventory. Hound whined. He had his nose to the boot and was sneezing as if it offended him. I put my hand out, and he tucked his head under my wrist, the way he used to do when thunderstorms were too talkative. We're going, I said. Now, as we turned, the ice table made a sound I can only describe as polite dismay. The objects shifted slightly, aligning as if tracked by an unseen magnet. The lock of hair rolled. The Polaroid's white border clicked against the table leg. The boot slid 1 inch and stopped. We left. We left a museum curated by hunger. We left the table of proposed trades. We didn't take offerings from a thing that learned us in a night, and decided we had holes it could fill. Dusk came fast, the way it does when the sky has been practicing all day, and finally remembers the choreography. The village smoke was tangible now, a smear like a fingerprint across the horizon. The radios went silent. The red lights didn't follow. For the first time since arriving, the hollow struck me as a place that had other things to do than us. I felt small and grateful to feel small. We walked. Theo started to tell a story about the river that refused to be gentle the day it took her. He stopped and started again, and finally did it without turning her into a lesson. Katia let him talk. Hound's limp eased when the ground changed to something like path. We walked. When the bell came this time, I nearly didn't notice it. A single clear note, pure as a church glass. Then a second. I counted them in my head, even though I'd promised not to. 1, 2, 3. The third was wrong, not musically, but spiritually, like someone you trusted taking your palm and turning it up to show you hadn't hidden the thing you thought you had. We stopped. The third bell meant nothing. The third bell meant everything. Theo put his hand out without looking at me, and I took it. Hound sat. Katia closed her eyes. The fourth bell came, a tiny, delicate chime like a milk tooth dropped in porcelain. You counted, Katia said softly, not accusing, just naming a fact we had to survive. The wind exhaled. The red lights rose again, but not from behind us, from ahead, from the village. They say there's a kind of fear that makes you laugh, and it's not because you think it's funny. It's because the body needs a second door to run through, and laughter looks like one from a distance. Theo laughed when we saw the red lights above the roofs. He clapped a hand to his mouth, like he could stuff the sound back in. They don't go there, he said, breaking his own hope like a toy. They can't. They don't, Katia said, voice flat. But the village can be made to look like itself from far away. We entered streets that felt correct in the way. A copied signature is correct until you run your finger over it and feel the ridge of deceit. Doors stood at the right angles. Smoke smelled right, except for the sweetness underneath it, like burned sugar. The first person we saw was a woman at a window. She waved like a neighbor. Her hand was missing 2 fingers. My stomach dropped, then rose in relief when I remembered I had indeed met a woman with 2 missing fingers in this village yesterday, and she had waved like that and asked about the dog. "Hound," I whispered. He sniffed the air once, twice, then sneezed. He leaned closer to me. He did not wag. The radios turned themselves on. From them, the clatter of cups, the mumble of voices, a radio broadcast in a language I didn't speak made from syllables I did. The woman at the window's mouth moved, and the radios matched it half a beat off, like a puppet show with a lazy master. "Keep going," Katia said, "to the square, to people we can touch." We reached the square. It had been decorated in our absence. Ropes of drying fish hung where flags had been. Bundles of twigs tied in patterns that weren't a language, but wanted to be draped the well. Children's boots lined up in pairs the way they do outside school or after a wet day, except they were all left boots. A band stood near the steps of the council building, instruments held at ease. No one played. An old man stepped forward. He had been the first to agree to guide us for a price, and then the first to decline, eyes gone thin at the edges. He bowed slightly to Katia, and then to me. "You came back," he said. His voice had color, relief washing it. The radios didn't match him. For the first time in hours, the radios were quiet. I could have wept at the cunning gentleness of that little miracle. "We tried," I said. "We almost didn't." Theo stood at the center of the square under the band's gaze and looked up at the red lights. They hovered over the roofs, then dimmed, then brightened, a breathing. He took a step backward and one forward, as if testing the gravity. "If this is a stage," he said, "who's it for?" "You," the old man said. He spat to one side with the conviction of ritual. "Always you, the ones who listen too long." "Then why live here?" Theo asked, not unkind, not accusing, genuinely baffled. "Why build houses in the jaw? We were here before the mouth," the old man said. "Or it was smaller, or we were bigger. Memory changes shape when you hold it too long." He looked at Hound, bent slowly, with the care old bones require, and offered his palm. Hound considered, then gave it a single lick. The old man smiled not in his face, but in his shoulders. "A dog remembers the shape of safety, even when it is a shadow," he said. "That is why it didn't keep the first hunters." The dogs barked. "What does it want?" I asked. He shrugged. "Everything. Nothing. Names. Steps. The part of you that leans when a bell rings. The secret you would give if someone promised to carry it without judgment. The little grief that stands inside the big grief and knocks like a polite guest." Theo closed his eyes. He stood very still, and I knew that he was speaking to our dead without moving his lips. I knew because I was doing it too. Hound pressed against my hip so hard my leg numbed. The red lights dimmed again. The band lifted their instruments and didn't play. The radios clicked once. Katia took my elbow. "Take your brother," she said. "Go to the barn with the blue door. Don't look at the horses. Don't speak to the boy with the cap if you see him. He isn't hungry, but his hunger is bright. I did as I was told. We moved like people who have cheated death enough times to stop gloating. Inside the barn, hay made the sweet, rotten smell animals love. Hound lay down in hay like it was a luxury hotel. Grunting once in satisfaction, he immediately denied having made. Theo sat on a bale and put his head in his hands. If this is the part where we're safe, he said. Why do I feel like I left my ribcage outside? Because safety has a half-life here, Katia said from the doorway. Sleep while you can be tired. We slept like condemned men, offered a bed by a merciful jailer. When I woke, the world had edges again. The red lights were gone. The radios were just radios. Theo's face had the slackness of dream. Hound snored, legs twitching as he ran some wild meadow's edge. For a moment, the hollow was a rumor, and we were people with chores. We left the village at noon, escorted by 3 men and a woman who carried a long staff wound with brass wire. The forest on this side of the ridge was indifferent, which is a mercy. We moved without speaking. The brass wire clicked faintly against the staff, like an insect that had decided it liked its cage. At the last rise, the woman stopped. We don't go further, she said. If we go farther, we might like it there and forget to come back. She touched Hound's head. Take care of your men. Hound, who takes himself too seriously to wag for strangers, wagged just once. We walked until the sky softened in a way skies do only when they aren't calculating. Theo spoke into the air, not to me. I won't go back, he said. I won't. I'll miss her, and I'll love her, and I'll let the missing live like an animal in my chest without feeding it strangers. Okay, I said, because promises break easiest when wrapped in ceremony. And we both knew this needed to be plain to last. Okay, when we reached the highway, Hound climbed into the back of the truck and put his head on my shoulder, heavy as metal. I drove with both hands for the first time in months, fingers sure. Theo watched the trees until the trees stopped deserving watching. Katia fell asleep with her knife in her lap and her hand on its hilt, not because she expected danger, but because she had taught her hand this new way to rest. As we left the last shoulder of mountain, the radio picked up a station that wasn't ours. An old song about a train that took and never brought anything back but noise. Theo turned the volume up until it was comical. We laughed the way you laugh when you stagger out of a haunted house, and someone is already selling you a corn dog. We laughed because the body needed an exit, and we'd found one. We didn't talk about the fact that my compass still pointed lazily toward the listening table. We didn't say we would throw it into a river and watch it sink and hope the current changed it from a needle into a fish. We didn't say we knew it might not. That night, at a motel built to resemble the idea of comfort, Hound slept between us on the carpet and woke 3 times with a choke in his throat, like he was trying to bark underwater. I stroked his ears and told him, Good boy, good boy. The kind of good that has nothing to do with obedience and everything to do with staying. In the morning, Theo made coffee in a machine designed to fail, and we drank it like we were men who believed in mornings. Do you think the hollow knows our names? He asked. Or does it only know how we sound when we're afraid? Both, I said. One more, the other better. We packed. We loaded Hound. We flirted clumsily with the idea that we were ordinary as we pulled onto the road. A sound rose from the trees to our right. I braced. It wasn't bells. It wasn't flutes. It was a choir of crows arguing about nothing and everything, selfish and alive. Hound sat up and watched them with the respect predators offer each other. He put his paw on my arm and left it there, heavy. A weight I had earned. A weight I would carry. We turned the radio off. We sang our own song, off-key, stupid human. Theo sang high, because that's what he does when he can't cry anymore. I sang low, because that's what I do when I have too much held in my mouth. Hound huffed at the chorus as if to say, disastrously, you are trying. And trying is the right, wrong thing. Far behind us, the mountain practiced our names again, quietly. Like a student studying for a test they knew they'd have another chance to take. We drove until even that felt like the kind of rumor you're embarrassed to bring up in daylight. We drove into a day that did not plan to eat us in daylight. We drove into a day that did not plan to eat us